Welcome novices and acolytes to the Sisterhood, presented by DuneNewsNet.com and What the Force. Join us on this meta-mythic journey through the Dune universe.
Welcome novices to the Sisterhood. I am Hannah, your host, and joining me is Marie C. Gould from What the Force. Thank you so much for being here, MC, as always.
Thank you, everyone, for coming along on this journey. We are finally at the finale, and what a finale.
Indeed. So you can follow the Sisterhood Podcast at Podcast Above All across social media platforms, as well as the Dune Newsnet YouTube channel. So you can continue on this conversation with us as we wait for season 2. And then also, if we have any other specials that might drop, you can see those when they happen. You can find me at Shihaya Springs on Twitter and Blue Sky. And where can listeners find you, MC?
I'm most well known for my podcast, What the Force, which you can find everywhere podcasts are found. And you can follow me directly at Marie C. Gould on all social media platforms.
Alrighty. And so, like I teased, we have an official season 2 renewal announcement. According to The Hollywood Reporter, showrunner Alison Shapker announced at a press conference on Thursday that Dune Prophecy will be returning for a second season. She said, "We're so thrilled and grateful for their support, for our partners at Legendary, and most of all, that we get to keep working with these incredible people in front of and behind the camera and get to keep telling this story." So what are your thoughts on this renewal, MC?
It's just a breath of fresh air after, especially, we got to watch the finale before we got the renewal. And then we were like, they had better renew it. And then we got the renewal. So it's been an amazing week from a fan perspective. Very rarely do femme-focused media like this get renewals. This is a deeply complex show. And we've even had our leads, like the actresses behind Tula and Valya, talk about how it's rare to see, especially middle-aged women, in the spotlight as the main driving force behind the conflict of the show. And that's just rare to see represented on screen. And also, it is an amazing show to talk about in the way that you and I like to talk about media too. So I'm just over the moon. I'm really excited. My voice only has one tone, or I'd be really fangirling up right now. I just have a little bit of a cold. So we're dealing with that during this recording. Tis the season.
Yeah, I was like really pleasantly surprised because I was honestly not expecting them. If they were to announce a season 2, I was in this position where I was expecting it to be like after the finale, be a couple weeks. But the fact that it's coming out days before we got to see the episode early because of screeners, but the announcement came days before the episode's airing for everyone else.
Confidence in this story too, right?
Exactly. It shows that they're confident in the show. And I think the big thing is that because it's coming out right before the finale, it also is like an incentive for people to binge it. And like we've talked about like in the past, like discussions about like shows and stuff where now because there's been so many cancellations, people wanting to wait until a show is all of the episodes have come out, or there has been a renewal in order to even start a show. Because you don't want to get invested to just then get like that cut off. So it's a really smart business move, and it's just like really refreshing and oof, I don't have to worry about this anymore.
I don't have to worry about my new favorite show. Yeah, exactly. And it is, I think that this show has benefited from being released on traditional cable with the streaming model behind it. Whereas the streaming model first content tends to be a little bit more harshly criticized as far as what can be renewed and what, etc. So I think it just benefited from being released on traditional cable primarily first, much like House of the Dragon.
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe it's just an advantage that HBO shows or HBO Max or shows have is they just like innately can have that option.
Yeah.
But you see the way that it benefits the shows for sure. It targets different audiences.
There's a bunch of shows that are like being actively released on like ABC or CBS, and they're getting renewals year after year, whereas shows that are as good quality, et cetera, on streaming shows might not, which
Yeah.
it puts you at a massive disadvantage to release on a streaming platform nowadays.
In terms of my favorite shows, even Interview with the Vampire shows that AMC is doing, they're released on the AMC cable channel and on the AMC streaming option. And so that definitely contributes to the fact that all of those shows are just renewal, renewal, renewal. But it's
Yeah.
interesting that streaming used to be what people thought would be the fix for problems with cable shows being canceled.
And it's almost
And-
exacerbated the problem, which is, it's hard. It's a hard environment.
So thankful that this show has been able to get a second season and continue to tell this really incredible and mythically rich story.
We're very lucky that this show has come together in this way with this creative team and with the network seeming to really support it, which you said pretty much from our first pre-episode that you felt like there's a lot of support with the creative team. And yeah.
I think I had the feeling when they made the choice to have it be an HBO original and release on cable.
Yep. Absolutely. You want to dig into
And-
questions?
Yes, let's dig into some questions. We got quite a few this week, so that's really awesome. So starting off with Usul Tasm 394 on Twitter. Who are y'all's favorite characters this season?
Oh my goodness. Dang, this is a hard question. You want to answer first? That's a cop-out.
This is in my mind though, like I love all of these characters so much, but at the front of my mind, I keep thinking about Tula. I really do love Tula, and I think as of this season, I can't stop thinking about Tula, so that's probably my answer. Is
Yeah.
Tula.
She's my favorite too. So I have to choose another one because we can't both have the same favorites. Yeah, she's mesmerizing, especially in this episode. She just steals the show. I'm going to go with Desmond. He's so evil, but I love him. I just wish he would get a different haircut. But we've talked about this.
We have. But actually, he was my second choice. It was either Desmond or Inez. That would have been my second. Yeah, so we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah. And the fact that their stories, although they were so separate for the whole season, and then they come together right at the end, that has made me such a massive fan of them both. Yeah, Tula and Desmond are mother-child duo.
Yes, I want more of them already.
And it seems like we'll get more of them through the next season.
Next is Forever a Killjoy on Twitter. I was a little disappointed that Lila was almost just used for Raquel to come forward. I wish she could have used the knowledge of her ancestors on her own to help the sisterhood. Is there a symbolic importance to her being a vessel? And where do you see her story going?
Do you have thoughts?
I do. And essentially for people not familiar necessarily with the Dune books, the situation going on with Lila is very similar to what transpires with Alya and the entire concept of the abomination, which is usually someone who is not fit to undergo the agony, but does, for whatever reason, is born with this prescience or obtains its prescience at an age that is not usual. They've not trained enough to be able to undergo it, which is the case with Lila. And so she's struggling with this possession by ancestors. And this is an important lore element. It makes sense that we see her struggling with this. But I do understand being a little bit like, I want more of Lila back, because we really haven't seen much of Lila. So I definitely understand that sentiment. But I think by the end of episode 6, people see why this was important, because obviously we need story-wise for Dorothea to come forward and unearth this stuff. And so going forward, I definitely think that it will involve Lila getting some sort of control over Dorothea, and a lot of that in our exploration and work. But as of where we end the season, I think it's plot-wise important that this is happening, but also because of this, Lila's symbolically stuck in the underworld still. She's still grappling with that. Those are my thoughts on that. What's your take, MC?
Absolutely. So I was going to go into this in a little bit when we talk about some of the themes and motifs and important things that they're going through. But when you're possessed, you actually are experiencing the archetypes. You are the shadow. And so you get to experience the shadow, and thus you become wiser and stronger because the shadow is on main, basically. And so the archetype of the Dark Mother is you. The archetype of the mage is you. So I'm talking about Raquella and also Dorothea. She will be stronger for the fact that she has gone through this and has experienced those lives through those eyes in a way that just listening to the voices of the ancestors wouldn't enable her to. But it does mean she's still stuck in the underworld, she's still struggling, and she is still on her hero's journey, as we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, she's stuck, and so she's going to be the villain for a while unintentionally.
Very cool. And so next up is from Tom the Fanboy on Blue Sky. He asked, how much of the Bene Gesserit mission was the Founding Mother's plan, and how much of it was designed by their supercomputer? The machine, whose name escapes me, doesn't seem to be lying at any point or being disobedient, but in a universe like this one, can it be trusted? So I assume what he's asking is if the breeding program and like the mission of the Bene Gesserit that they have like later down the line, if that's like all the Founding Mother's plan or if some of it was designed by the supercomputer. And in that regard, my answer would be no. I think quite literally, a neural is she's just a library.
Mm.
And to calculate, to keep track of and log family trees and DNA lines and stuff like that, but then also to predict matches. I think that's quite literally all she's designed to do. And she's more of like a tool that's being used by whoever the Mother Superior is. And in terms of the Bene Gesserit plan later on, I don't think it's the plan of the original Founding Mother, Raquella, but I think it does change because the idea that Raquella was talking about was just like helping breed and make strategic matches, and we're preventing any like crazy tyrants from being born, that kind of thing. But then later, because we haven't talked about it at all thus far in the show, later on, the goal becomes creating the Kwisatz Haderach, and every other thing that they do within the breeding program is in the service to that, whether it's directly contributing to creating Paul's bloodline, basically, or creating people who will have different positions who will eventually interact with certain people at certain times. It's all functioning for the purpose of the Kwisatz Haderach, but he's not an idea yet.
Which is like a spiritual answer to a logistical problem.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways. And so I think and we're going to get to it, but that's the question that is raised by this episode in particular. And when you look back on it, the whole season, which is this separation between sort of the spiritual self and the analytical self that the sisterhood has.
Yeah, definitely. His next question was, do you think the show or the future films will ever show us a guild navigator David Lynch showed us in the 84 film? If so, how weird do you think they'll get? Not weird enough for my tastes. They made the story so grounded. I think the future stuff needs to get weirder.
Like floating fetus guys from the 1984 version? Is that what you're talking about? They described them in the Sisterhood book. They describe like the main first navigator, the woman, right? And she's weird looking.
And stuff like the show talked about Francesca and her dealings were with the guild. They've shown us face dancers, so I wouldn't be shocked if the show also intends to show us some guild navigators up close. But in terms of the movies, for sure. In the first Dune book, we don't see guild navigators on page at all. They're mentioned, but they're never on page. They're never actually seen. It's only in the second book, Dune Messiah, that we actually see a guild navigator, Edric, and he's a quite significant character. So I would say that the third Dune movie, it's almost certain that we're going to see some guild navigators. I don't know how weird they'll get, although I feel like in Dune, Denny decided to throw in a random spider human pet for the Harkonnens. So I
Yeah,
think it'll be weird.
I think it'll get weird, and I hope it's, like, weird in his own vision in some ways, and I wonder if because we haven't seen them on screen in Denny's version that we won't have seen them. I don't know. They're described in the Sisterhood book, so I think we might get a proto version of how weird they'll get.
Yeah.
Pretty weird.
That's something that I've thought about is like, would the Sisterhood show it before Dune 3 does? Because I don't know what the release timeline would be if Sisterhood season 2 or the Prophecy
The
season 2 would
prophecy.
come out.
So here's my thought. I think that we're gonna get
Mhm.
more of the different schools in future
Mhm.
seasons.
I
More
agree.
politics from the lens of these other schools
hmm
that would impact the prophecy in some ways.
Yeah, I think so. It would make sense. And because of that, I think because it's so far back in history, they can almost make it look however they want it to look without it necessarily impacting what Denny chooses to visually represent navigators, because it's like 10,000 years of evolution distance. So like they could change in how they develop easily within that time frame.
I really love the 1984 version where literally the Spacing Guild threatens the Emperor. The spice must flow.
And then one last one from Chris Smith 8851 on YouTube. While the breeding program does continue, Valya's side is also attempting to gain control of the throne right now, which we know won't happen. That implies her side would lose. It's not really a question, but it is something that I thought we could talk about a little bit,
Mhm.
because I agree, but I also disagree, because the Bene Gesserit do have control over the throne.
Mhm.
Like, quite often, the Crino emperors marry Bene Gesserit, and then the daughters that they have are trained as Bene Gesserit. Like, all of, in Dune, the emperor, all of his daughters, Irulan and all of her sisters, are all trained by the Bene Gesserit. And their mother was a Bene Gesserit. In that sense, yes, they do have control of the throne. And Irulan is being trained and prepared to be her father's heir.
Mhm.
I would say they do have control over it, but their focus does, I think, shift more toward creating the Kwisatz Haderach. And I think their control over the throne, at least in my opinion, becomes more preparing so that when their Kwisatz Haderach is ready, they can then marry a Carino daughter.
There's no way the Carinos would stay in power if the Bene Gesserit didn't want them to be in power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. They would have easily, if they weren't important, they would have been cast off the board, and a different house would have come in. So yeah, I definitely think the way that they approach it will change. Um, but I do think they do get control of the throne in some regard. But I guess how that happens is how much Valya is willing to bend her initial plan, or not. So I guess we'll have to wait for season 2 to see how that shakes out. But let's jump into some overall themes and motifs for this episode. Why don't you begin, MC?
Sure. So the first one we wanted to talk about was the shadow and how that can have a collective version of it. I did start to talk about the shadow last episode, and we probably should have talked about it earlier on in the season because it's very apparent what the different shadow versions are out there. We talked about it more from a personal perspective, which Robert Bly, who likes to talk about the Jungian shadow specifically, talked about the shadow as the heavy garbage bag of stuff we don't want to deal with that we trail behind us like a shadow. This is the idea that there is darkness within ourselves that we don't want to face. And when the shadow is ignored or buried, it actually grows and becomes angry. Or he describes it because this is a long trash bag that you carry behind you, smelly. And so, what you do with your personalized shadow is you project it out there. So, you'll cast your shadow onto somebody that you care about. The first time that you typically do that is with your witch, which is the archetype within yourself that you'll cast out on all women out there, your mother, your first girlfriend, your first wife, your teachers. They all will have a witchy look at some point. And then there's a women might cast out the ogre or the king on their father. These archetypes themselves are as old as our brains, and it's our way of organizing and collecting things for ourselves. When we have not dealt with something, that's when it becomes our shadow. And the only way for us to see it is by either watching media and seeing ourselves projected on screen. And so we have projected our shadow onto a character, or in our real lives, we project character or shadows out there. Robert Bly and Young say we have to, once it is projected out there, learn that it is our shadow, identify it, and take it back into ourselves. Robert Bly, he talks about how you have to eat your shadow, which is that you have to consume it back into yourself so that you can then gain that power back to you. Oftentimes, the first shadow that you have to actually consume back is the witch, because she is the thing that eats. The mother feeds and the witch eats. And so you need her power, which you gain back once you eat the shadow, to eat other shadows out there. So what he's trying to say is that the dark feminine out there is often angry at us because, from a patriarchal society perspective, we abuse her. We don't like that power. We don't like the power that comes with it. And so we're afraid of it. And then we ignore the feminine within ourselves and the things that, like, women will ignore the dark feminine and men will ignore all the feminine. And so we need to eat that shadow back into ourselves and say, it's okay. Because then once that power is within us, you can play with your own shadow and use that power for yourself. So he also talks about how not only people, but communities and countries have collective shadows. So you think about the world around you and how your small town that you grew up in might have something that is hidden, like a town secret that nobody talks about, but everybody knows about it and it's just ignored. And the longer you ignore it, the angrier it gets. With a possession, like I just talked about, it is that archetype on main. So the shadow has taken over and is angry because it has not only been ignored, but it has been attempted to be forgotten. And so that's a big thing that is happening both in this episode as well as in the overall season. As we've seen these two sort of halves of the sisterhood split, Raquel has said the only way to be a stronger sisterhood is to have both halves like come together. And that's the key to this, is that you need to have this very faithful religious aspect of the sisterhood, not ignored, but combined together. And, you know, only whole could the sisterhood be as powerful as they need to be. And Raquel saw that in the first episode.
Yeah, and I think part of finding that will be the idea of the Kwisatz Haderach, because it's that idea of this breeding program, but the ideals behind the Kwisatz Haderach are based then in these more religious, faithful concepts and beliefs that the sisterhood was founded on.
Like this
So I think that's
ultimate
probably
being is exactly what they've been talking about. And then those two very disparate halves can come together in a single mission, and that will fuel it for the 10,000 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how that reconciliation will come about. But I do feel like probably a lot of that will be impacted by the younger generation. I think Jen being very clearly on Tula's side versus Emmeline, which is more aligned with Dorothea's beliefs. Lila, once she's worked through all of this internal underworld stuff that she's going through, then also Theodosia, but
Theo.
yeah, these younger girls, I think as they grow up and they go on their journeys and they move out of the maiden stage, I think they'll really foster this sort of amalgamation. Because I think we're supposed to look at them as a mirror for like Valya and Tula and their friend group when they were younger.
Yeah, I
And
think
like
so.
big changes they were making. So that's
Yeah.
where I see that going for sure. And connected to this idea of the shadow, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to be stuck in the underworld. Because I think that's
I love
like,
this topic.
it's so good. And it's the way that I think about it is when you've gone to confront the shadow, but you haven't done it properly, or you haven't
Yeah.
been able to do so. And that's how you get stuck in the underworld.
The idea that you went to go and face your darkness, but then you actually, at the last minute, denied that it existed.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we see a lot of this in different ways throughout this season. So I wanted to delve a little bit into this because there's some really
Sure.
cool stuff there. In Joseph Campbell's The Hero of a Thousand Faces, in the section where he's talking about the road of trials, he starts talking about shamanism and studies and research that have been done on it. And essentially, he's likening the process that the shaman goes through as the road of trials and that entering into the underworld phase. On this laborious journey, the shaman has to encounter and master a number of different obstacles, which they're not always easy to overcome. And after wandering through this darkness, he'll occasionally come across the bones of other shamans and their animal mounts who have died along the way. And eventually he reaches an opening in the ground, which is where this difficult stage of entering the underworld presents itself. After he appeases the watchers of the kingdom of the dead and has made his way past all of these numerous perils, he comes at last to face the Lord of the Underworld, Erlich himself, and the latter rushes against him, and the shaman essentially has to pacify and soothe the monster. And this moment of dialogue between Erlich and the shaman is this moment of ecstasy that the shaman experiences. And according to Dr. Geza Rohim, the medicine men, therefore, are simply making both visible and public the systems of symbolic fantasy that are present in the psyche of every adult member of their society. So all of that is to say, Nazir and Kasha represent the figure who's undergoing this process of descending towards the underworld, but they don't make it out alive. And contrasted to Valya, who overcomes the virus, or this Lord of the Underworld, in this particular instance, this concept connects to the shadow in the way that this symbolic fantasy that's present within the psyche of all adult members of their society, that's the collective shadow of their community that they're facing and braving as the hero symbolically and taking on that responsibility for the collective. And so we see both Nazir and Kasha trying to face this, but unfortunately, as we see, they don't make it out the other side. And so Clarissa Piccola Estes, the author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, had to pull out my copy. She's talked about this kind of process as well, where developing a relationship with the wildish nature is an essential part of a woman's individuation. In order to accomplish this, a woman must go into the dark, but at the same time, she must not be irreparably trapped, captured, or killed on her way there or back. And so we see examples of trying to undergo this process, but not being successful. And in that way, they're trapped within the underworld. And on the other hand, Desmond is another example of this, someone who's stuck in the underworld, but he's not dead. That isn't why, that's not the reason he's in the underworld. And so Estes also talks about this context within Bluebeard, which is the archetypal predator, and that he is called a failed magician. And she says that in folklore, there are any number of sorcerer apprentices who foolishly dared to venture beyond their actual skill levels by attempting to contravene nature. They were punished by injury and cataclysm, whether that be Icarus, the Zuni myth of the boy and the eagle, or even Lucifer. This character typically is punished for challenging the ineffable, the laws of nature such as life and death. And as such, he is continuously exiled from redemption. And thus, he's stuck in the underworld. So I wanna hear your take on this, MC, because you talk about this a lot.
I do talk about this a lot, and I haven't read this particular quote from her in a while, so I'm glad that you called it out because this is great. Being continuously exiled from redemption is exactly what is going on with Desmond, and I'm so happy that you pulled this out. This is great. So the Predator themselves being a sorcerer's apprentice fits a lot with what we've talked about with where Desmond is even at in his hero's journey, is that he is this bully, is that he's stuck. Like the hero is meant to go to the underworld, go to the darkness, to taste the dragon's blood and bring it within himself. And he is afraid to eat his own shadow, right? That is what it is. And so when you are stuck in the underworld, you're in this death-like state. We've referred to Vader a lot, and we might talk about him a little bit in this episode because the parallels are like massive. Same with kind of Ben Solo or Kylo Ren. Like this idea that you are a villain is not actually true. You're just a hero that is stuck in the underworld and you haven't figured out how to take the darkness within yourself, eat your shadow, and you're on this destructive path because of it. And sometimes you might be on a cowardly path too, but for Desmond, for Vader, they're on a destructive path. And I love that she called them failed sorcerer's apprentices because they often have this very toxic relationship with a powerful character like a tyrant or like a sorcerer. And it's very clear that is what's going on with Desmond. He almost tries to find a master to tell him what to do, even though he's often
Yeah.
calling the shots.
And I'd even argue that Sauron fits this kind of motif
Yeah.
as well within Tolkien's lore and the way that Tolkien describes Sauron and what happens to him. It's very much this exact concept. Yeah, so it's really cool, and we'll definitely get into more of this a little bit later on in the episode, but I think we should jump into life archetypes now and see where all of our characters are at.
Absolutely. Our main character is Valya. She's been the main character throughout this whole season, and she is actually transformed in this episode. I'm happy to announce she has gone from being a king to being a crone. We know this because of what happens later on in the world of fiction. They're often the mentor that comes from the desert to help the young heroes on their path. And guess what happens at the end of the episode? The thing about the king transformation into Crone is that you meet death as if it is an old friend. The king has to die for the next king to take the throne. And for the kingdom to be renewed, Valya has to die because she is too stuck in her ways to accept the religious aspects of the sisterhood to be able to come together in those two forms and have a synthesis. We need to have this synthesis of the two ideas of what the sisterhood needs to be to outlive the current generation of who has these things in mind. And Raquel saw that as part of the solution. And so Valya experiencing a death and going off on her own with these young heroes to a death-like planet is super appropriate. So I'm hyped about that. Does that surprise you?
I was almost unsure if she would get to this point in her journey as
Yeah.
season 1. And we were even talking about, we weren't even sure we were going to see Arrakis in the finale. But also, at the same time, it makes so much sense. Especially because I think we see Valya and the importance of her creating the voice, of her undergoing the agony. And now this is another important integral aspect of the sisterhood, which is overcoming fear.
Overcoming
so it
fear,
makes-
which is death in the sisterhood's
Mhm.
mind. So
Yes.
that's so key. And she did. She let herself die. Oh, we'll get to that scene.
And then we have Tula, who she's been a queen for most of this season, but she's cementing herself as a queen in a little bit of a different way, because in the past, it's been her focus of nurturing and protecting the acolytes and students at the sisterhood. And now it's her taking care of her son.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think that she's moved on to being king, although she might in the future, because one of the calls of the queen to take on being the king is there's invaders and she has to take care of those invaders with the young heroes. So this might be that she like goes and finds the small sisters or is able to resolve the problem and then naturally becomes the king in that and has to deal with a cataclysm and rebels of her own. But yeah, she's doubling down on being a queen, but for her own personal character story, which is her own son.
I'm really excited about that and seeing how that kind of transition works for her. Because, yeah, she's
I would
my
say that,
favorite.
like, all teachers in schools are considered to be queen archetypes because they're
Mhm.
like pseudo parents, mentors,
Mhm.
etc. But like for a gaggle of children, when you're a crone, you become like the key old mentor to save the one hero, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a little bit of a different vibe. It's the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this story is when you become a crone.
Yes. Mhm.
Haviko.
Ah, Javicco.
Haviko. So he was a puppet. And God, how did you feel when Valya called him a puppet? Did you feel
That was
vindicated?
so vindicated. I was actually speechless. I had to pause it for a second and be like, they actually said it.
Do you feel very smart?
So smart. It's just quite literally everything, like everything we said about him.
I know. And we knew this from the beginning. And then we were like, hey, but happy circumstances. He actually has his first key king moment, which is that he takes away power from the rebels. He takes away power from everybody else by making his first decision as a king, which is to have control over his own life. And again, embrace death as if it's an old friend. And that is
Mhm.
the kind of key line that kings are afraid of death and afraid of not winning all the time, not hanging on to their power, but he gives up power basically because he realizes that he is standing in the way. And so this was a really powerful moment for Mark Strong, and I'm so sad.
I feel bittersweet about it.
I wanted him to like become a good king, but I think we
Yeah.
were able to prove he wasn't able to get out of it. And
No.
yeah.
I also wanted more of him and Francesca, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's my only thing. If I had to have one real criticism, it would be that. And it's not even really a criticism, it's just a wish that like I could have had more of that because I loved it so much.
Absolutely. On to Natalia, solidifying her tyrant status by even saying, "Oh no, Haviko, you're going to be our puppet." Like she literally goes into how he's going to be her puppet. And we have this scene with Valya where she calls him a puppet. It's so good.
I guess we should talk a little bit about Desmond and where he falls now.
I think he's still a bully. I think he's just changed masters officially
Okay.
to Natalia. And one of the things about this bully stage is that they have often a master. Like you
Mhm.
talked about like the failed sorcerer's apprentice, like you think about Vader, you think about like other sort of the hunter predator characters that are often in fiction. There's often like a person who is the authoritative person behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Yeah, Natalia is holding his leash basically because he wants somebody to hold his leash. Have you seen the videos of the dogs, the guy walking the border collie and the husky? And the husky
No, what's
wanders off when he drops the leash, and the border collie brings his own leash back to the person walking the dog so that he can hold the leash, and then gets out of the leash and brings the husky back to be held by the person walking.
that?
Bullies want somebody to be holding their leash. Yeah.
It's definitely something that's very clear about Desmond's character. Like, he kept begging Haviko to use
Abigail.
him, but he wouldn't. And so it makes sense that, like, now he finds that role in Natalia, who was very eager to
Oh,
use
she's
him
gonna
for her
like
own ends.
show up on Wallach 9 and be like, "Get out of here. I'm gonna arrest you all." She's gonna
Yeah.
be aggressive. Her and Haviko quite clearly in what an aggressive
Mhm.
archetype king looks like versus a passive archetype king.
Yeah. Moving on to our next character archetype, Inez. Do you feel like she's officially cemented herself as a hero? In
Oh,
my opinion, I'd say so.
absolutely. She tried to save Kieran unsuccessfully, but that was all her own decision. She went totally against her mother and her father in those choices, and she has gone off world, which is like a bit she exited a threshold, right? The thresholds are usually the boundaries between your known and unknown world. And she's literally going to the planet of what is considered to be death. You go to Arrakis to die. This is
Yeah.
what this is, right? Yeah, she's officially a heroine hero. And it will be exciting to talk about what that means, which is the biggest thing for heroes is that they think that they need to slay the dragon, save the sick king, which will be interesting to see what her sick king is for her. Might be her mother, right? The heroine's journey from a symbolic perspective is a little bit different. You have to face the dark goddess within yourself. So that'll be cool if that ends up happening on Arrakis somehow. The truth is that the hero has to learn about love and community and bring the knowledge of darkness and that everything is interconnected back to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I
she'll
think
be a
so.
better leader for have going on this journey. And the fact that Constantine is also on Arrakis now is like really interesting to me because Valya being a crone, being a mentor, she might actually be a stable archetype now. She might not actually be on a positive change journey. She might just be a mentor for a little while. Valya, because she's with these young heroes. So Kieran and Yanez and potentially Constantine.
Yeah. I'm really curious what the kind of plan is for Constantine going forward and what role he'll play. But yeah, so moving on to Lila, she's still in this state of being possessed, which is when you have, like we said last time, multiple archetypes inside of you.
Or at least the archetypes they come to the forefront and you wear them like a mask.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for her, this episode is Dorothea.
Yeah.
Who is embodying this sorcerer, aggressive mage archetype, which if you could talk a little bit more to that.
Yeah. The mage archetype itself is this idea that you refuse to leave the world because the world needs saving. And oftentimes, from an Eastern religion perspective, or Buddhism or Hinduism, this would be considered to be a bodhisattva, which is that you've refused to leave the world without saving all humanity. That's the positive journey of the mage, right? Gandalf the White, as an example. Like he has died and come back. He was a gray guy. He came back as this shining white example of the mage. But Raquella, she actually came as a mage to bring a message that saves humanity. She talks about the virus as a negative thing and she wants to save humanity from this thing. The aggressive version of the mage is the sorcerer. The passive version of it is the miser. And we see versions of that. Yeah, cross fiction as well. But the sorcerer is like Palpatine. Right? And it's driven by this idea of wanting to reject life and death to continue on a mission you have in your head of overcoming life and death through terrible means and to basically destroy the natural cycle of life and death that could exist within the world. And so, from a sisterhood perspective, from the lens of the sisterhood and the prophecy, that is the database, that is the knowledge, that is like this breeding program, the power of life and being able to lead you towards something. But right now, the sisterhood is aimless and doesn't have that something that they're trying to aim towards, which will eventually be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, and that's it. Again, I'm just like really excited to see Dorothea be this villain figure, actually, or this antagonist. Yeah, the last note would be Kieran's still a hero.
Yeah, he's moved from being a lover to a hero. I think that's fair. We can say that because he's leaving the planet and he's tried to do a whole bunch of stuff.
And all of the other kind of acolytes still in their maiden phase.
Yeah.
Except for Theodosia, who's also a hero.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everyone. So, I guess let's jump into the episode. We start with this image of a planet with 3 moons, and we find out that this is Wallach 9. And I'm just curious because this is like something that popped into my head when I saw it, but because it's 2 moons together, and then on the other side of a planet, a singular moon. And I was wondering, could this be something along the lines of a third-hand path for the sisterhood?
Or just maybe Mother Maiden Crone archetypes, right? So the primary feminine archetypes could be that. Could be third path.
Like a triangle, because the two that are together and then the one that's singular.
Yeah.
Triangle, and then the two opposing sides, but then a third other option.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about third path stuff?
If you want to, yeah.
Yeah, no, I can. The third path is oftentimes we are ourselves, and this ties to where you get to with a hero's journey. Oftentimes we view the world in the field of binaries. So things are either light or dark, or they are good or they are bad. They're never really somewhere in the middle. When you are in the darkest part of yourself and you consume the darkness, you consume the dragon's blood like Sigurd did when he slayed the dragon and he tasted the blood. Joseph Campbell talks about this as ongoing motif for the hero. You take the darkness within you and you then are able to have a moment, a briefest moment that everything is connected and you see with God's eyes or the mask of God, which is that you can see that the binaries are actually illusionary and you can see beyond the binaries to say everything all at once, basically. And this gives you a third path, a place by which it is not good or bad, but somewhere in the middle. That is the truth. And yeah, could be symbolically.
I mean, that's kind of what that idea of it's not either of these two opposing sides within the system.
Yeah.
It's like somewhere in between the two of them. I don't know. That's just like a visual
I love
thing
it.
that came to mind when I saw that. Because maybe it's just they decided to throw in 3 moons because sci-fi.
And it differentiates it from Solucious Secundus too, which has
True.
2. Yeah.
But anyway, so we see that it's on Walk 9. It's eerie and quiet. And then we find out that we're entering into this continuation of Dorothea's death scene, but from Tula's point of view. And so the girls are like hiding in a corner upstairs and they're like, what's happening? What's going on? And then they see Valya starting to use the voice. And then Tula's, no, Valya, don't, because she doesn't want her to do this. But then she goes through with it. And so all of the girls race down and they're like talking about what they should do to handle it. And don't worry, we'll take care of this. And then Tula runs off.
But before that, so they specifically use the terms like she was distressed, and basically they're ignoring the point of why she was upset, which is the sort of start of building the shadow. So they, even at this point, they're building the shadow for themselves, this secret they don't want to tell anybody, and they're not even like facing it. They're going around it. And which is such an interesting dichotomy with them being truthsayers. They're specifically using the truth to deceive, which is something that we heard early on in the season.
Yes. We definitely talked about this concept of what is truth and what is a lie. And
Yeah.
how can you use truth to deceive?
And telling half truths
yeah.
to yourself is building the shadow too.
Mhm.
It will, because you're not being truthful to yourself. And that's
Exactly.
part of accepting your darkness within yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tula's pregnant.
Tula's pregnant, and she tells Valya that it's Ori's baby, and Valya is surprisingly supportive. And she's, don't worry about mothers and children being separated. We can do whatever we want once I'm Mother Superior, and this child is our family. And so she's
And we'll raise it
genuinely
together.
Then we cut away to the present day with Nazir and Tula, and they're talking about creating an antivirus, transmuting the virus, which they say is the same process that Raquel did with the creation of the Rosak poison, which is the same backstory from the books that I mentioned last time. I was correct that they are using that same explanation for it. And so Nazir basically says that with her medical experience, she's better suited to undergo this process. They get her set up and she's on this bed.
But I like that they talked about that the body attacks itself, and like that they discover all the stuff about Kesha. Basically, she experienced this fear, and that's what triggered it, which was in line with what we had talked about. I'm like, it's almost like she triggered it when she was back at in Wallach 9. But I love this so much. Like this idea that like the fear is death. So fear is the mind killer? Like,
Fear the mind killer.
not even, like, exactly one-to-one, that idea, but it is. It's great.
Yeah, it's such a good scene. And I don't know quite what the technology is that they're using, but there's these 3 boxes with things that represent her regular cells and then the black stuff, which is the virus. So you can
Mhm.
see visually what's happening internally. And basically, she has to put herself in this meditative state and she starts to experience the vision, the dream. And as she's like fighting back against it, it starts to trigger the virus and it gets more aggressive. And eventually, it's no longer dormant. And so she's like using her breathing techniques and that starts to help. But then every time she actually tries to fight it, she can't. And she says it's not human. And
Yeah.
eventually, Nazir is unable to overcome this and she dies. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely devastated.
And she saw the eyes too, right? Near
Mhm.
the end, which this is fascinating. I don't know. It's been really interesting to see this particular thing, but we do discover that the virus itself is not of human creation, of course, through the course of this season.
I have thoughts about it in that way. And I'm actually gonna pull up because there's a quote that Joseph Campbell says, and I was gonna put it in my notes, but then I held back because I was like, I'm not sure if we're gonna discuss this or not. But this is a quote that Joseph Campbell says about Darth Vader, actually.
Oh,
He says, Star Wars deals with the essential problem. Is the machine going to control humanity, or is the machine going to serve humanity? Darth Vader is a man taken over by a machine. He becomes a machine, and the state itself is a machine. There is no humanity in the state. What runs the world is economics and politics, and they have nothing to do with the spiritual life. So we are left with this void. It's the job of the artist to create the new myths. Myths come from artists. And this is from an interview that Joseph Campbell did with Chris Goodrich for Publishers Weekly in 1985. And I feel like that lines up quite a lot with Dune because the idea behind the Butlerian Jihad is that we relied so heavily on machines and we gave up so much of ourselves and put so much reliance into machines that other people with machines could then enslave us. And then it just escalated from there to a point where humanity was almost wiped out. And you can interpret that as just more humans with machines, this grappling with humanity versus technology, the loss of humanity in the service of the advancement of the machine or the state. In this way, with the idea of this virus being a non-human creation, of this virus being like nanotech or whatever in origin, it's very similar, I think, to what he's saying about Darth Vader and him being overtaken by machinery and losing his humanity. And again, that's actually something that's quite relevant to
relevant.
Desmond particularly. But yeah,
And
I
also
think
as
this
like
is
a meta conversation about our world and how much we're
Mhm.
reliant on technology to communicate, to do all these things. And
Mhm.
do we lose a bit of ourselves in the ability to post to anyone in the world anytime?
Exactly.
Any
That's
sort of
another theme
technology
of
is an
Dune.
extension of the human experience. And if it becomes something that is taking away from our people to people interactions, then it is potentially getting in the way of our own spiritual growth too.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of what this is. This virus, it prevents spiritual growth
Yeah.
because the sisters they're so crippled by fear and then they die. They're having a problem overcoming their fear. They're unable to actually grapple with this and overcome it. And by doing so, they deepen their spiritual journey, which is what we see happen with Valya later on. But this prevents them from that. So that's, I think, a very relevant quote for that reason, because it kind of, this is, I think, symbolically and like within the message of the story, that's what it's being said.
Yep. No, I love it.
Okay, so then we cut to Desmond, and he's interrogating Kieran. He's like wanting to know, how long the Sisterhood has been connected to the insurgents and stuff. But Kieran's not wanting to play ball with him, and he has this great line where he's, "No, I've got no love for the Sisterhood or the Harkonnens, but I hate you and everything your Emperor stands for." And then he has like a smirk on his face as I throw him back into the wall.
Yeah.
And of course, Kieran didn't really know anything anyway.
He could corroborate that
Kayla?
Kayla was like a sister because he saw that, but he doesn't. He
Kayla
chooses
didn't
to not.
Yes. And so once that happens, we see him again. He's in the Spencer cells. And Inez is trying to free him. She's like hacking away this server board thing that like controls the dispenser technology, but her mother catches her. And
And this both proves like Inez is like a heroine because she's like trying to save her
Yeah.
boyfriend, but also that Natalia is full tyrant because like a queen might have a conversation with their child. She's like, you're now the enemy.
Yeah. And there's this like really interesting moment where like Inez says that like you always wanted me to come to you. Well, I'm coming to you now. Just let him go. Like I don't even need to ever see him again. But if you just let him go off,
Yeah.
it like that's all I'm asking. And then Natalia has this interesting emotional reaction, but then I wish you would come to me sooner. And then she has Inez arrested, but I can't help but thinking, but like actually, what's stopping her from letting Kieran go and doing what Inez wants? Because Inez is her daughter.
Because she's a tyrant and it's all about control at that point.
Yes,
And using your
exactly.
power for your own control.
And she even says, I wanted to teach you about power, so let this be a lesson. Like, she's not doing any of this based on what actually makes sense. It's based on what she thinks reiterates her power and assures her power. And I think it's actually interesting that she sees Inez as a piece to take off the board or as a threat.
She doesn't need Inez right now, but she will need Inez.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts on what plays out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Next is Javicco and Francesca having their moment. My God, this is such a sweet moment. I wrote down this friggin' guy. He's like a child. He's like a teenager. It's so cute.
This is such a classic scene. It's so freaking cute.
And she's like, well, I'm done here. Constantine is on his way, which is like so smart. She plays him like a fiddle. If he wasn't imprinted, even he would have been played too. But, let's talk to Mother Superior. We'll figure this out. I'll send out Natalia to like a goodwill mission. Like, it'll be fine. You'll take over her spot. It's great. Which ends up being like the solution for the sisterhood. Anyways, the sisters they're never going to go with a non-sister because the sister would be threatened by the sisters in the future. Like, they learned so many things from this guy.
It makes a lot of sense. But it's also kind of says a lot that Valya's initial plan actually did work, but then she doesn't utilize that plan.
Yeah.
And we see that when Francesca goes to talk to Valya, she tells her that Inez is in prison and they're like, okay, we need to save her. But she won't even listen to really what Francesca's trying to say. They need to change tactics, and he's lost the right to live out his reign in peace. And then we see for sure, at least in my opinion, that Francesca does love Javicco.
Yeah.
And you can see how hurt she is. But then Valya's just like, I'm sorry, but you knew this might happen. So cold.
Yeah. And we get this flashback to like the sort of Anna Rule and the four sisters like talking through what the plan is, basically, and when they hatched it. So at least there was like some sort of consensus, even though it was basically Valya's plan, but there was everybody in agreement.
You see the young Francesca eyeing the picture.
Yeah.
She's like very intrigued by him. So she's being chosen for something by Valya, but you don't even need to ask me. I'm like,
I'm game, yeah.
Already.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get them alone. Tula and Valya are talking about the future of Desmond, the divine child. And literally, like, she talks about how special he is and all of these things. And he's meant to do like these great things because he's special because they've never combined those genetics before, which is fascinating because it's what do you have happen when you have opposites combined? Well, you have this divine child outcome, which is great for us to talk about. And we'll guide him together.
Yes. And I just want to pop in a theory here. Valya's plan is to have a sister on the throne. And the plan for that was when they identified that Javicco and Natalia were the best suited to create this person and like the potential that they would have and stuff. That's why they planned for that union. But then she's saying that Tula's son has such great potential. And I was thinking, like, what potential does Valya see him having? And then I thought, what if she initially wanted to put Javicco, Natalia's daughter, with Tula's son?
Oh,
But
interesting.
later, and this is where it gets interesting, because then as we see, Valya thinks that this child is stillborn, so Underworld probably had the baby, like, noted as deceased. So
Yeah.
so like they make note of like
Because
who's
she can
dead.
only take in information from what they tell her, right?
Yeah, so they probably made a note of this child is dead, so that bloodline is extinct. And so when it came to calculating what the best fit for Inez would be, anyone who isn't alive would have been immediately filtered
Yeah.
out as an option. And the only other option that came up was Pruitt. But if they changed Desmond to being alive and redid the process,
Are you wanting the Predator to get with the former maiden?
I'm just saying that it would be interesting.
Okay.
It depends on what kind of story they want to tell and what
Yeah.
happens and stuff and what their plans are. Because I already have some other theories for Kieran and like what things that might transpire in Arrakis and like for his character overall. But like we've talked about the fact that they clearly would want to have Desmond's DNA.
Yeah. No, we've definitely talked about that. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. So that's just my theory, and I'm gonna leave it there for now.
Okay. They figure out that the technology is viral, but that also Desmond could be healed from it. So she's like, gotta go be with my son. Classic queen move. Gotta go save my son. Gotta go save the duckling. And Lila is awakened, but she is actually Dorothea. And so uses her trickery to be free.
Yes. She uses the little needle, and then we see Javicco go to confront Desmond, and
I love the
says to
line.
Francesca,
The witch has you so blind.
oh, it's so good. And then
So
like
good.
he,
Like seeing his witch out there.
yes, I was thinking that. Oh my gosh, it's so freaking good. And then Javicco's Francesca's more than a mistress, and Natalia always wanted like power and stuff, and so it'll be good for her to go and see the people and all this stuff. And then basically he says that he's essentially welcoming Valya back, and Desmond is not very happy with this.
Yeah, you're not my only advisor. But I should be. Yeah, no, he lost him. He lost him right then. Yeah.
And obviously Javicco is confronting Desmond over the fact that Inez was arrested.
Exactly.
After his scene with Francesca, a guard came up and let him know. So he's not very happy with Inez being locked up either. Like he's what authority do you have to do that? She's my daughter.
Yeah. Take that up with your wife. It was a great scene because it showed exactly how things were going to play out by, God, just the power of a divine child who has gone evil, right? I know we keep on comparing him to Vader, but this is exactly like the reason that Emperor Palpatine is able to rule is because he has Vader behind him. Anakin being a divine child, Desmond being a divine child who is now this foot soldier that is being controlled by whoever's willing to hold his leash is so archetypical. Like I can't even. It's just so good.
Oh my gosh. So then we see Emmeline reading some of Dorothea and her followers' writings to a group of sisters in the Cone of Silence. But then Lila shows up and they're all like, huh? We thought you were dead. And
Yeah.
they're like very much confused. And Emmeline's just trying to talk to Lila and understand what's
Your
going on.
eyes. Oh yeah, the cool eyes, which are like gold and then light blue mixed with the goldy like white. Like the contacts are cool.
Oh yeah, she looks so eerie. It's really cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like she's walking and she's like asking about all of these sisters who are followers of Dorothea, And then Emmeline's like, they disbanded, but we're like talking about them and stuff. But she still thinks it's Lila at this point. And then so she leaves. And then Emmeline's, okay, you guys keep reading. I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And follows her into the Mother Superior's office, which is where Jen finds them. And Jen explains what's going on.
But Jenna dislocated her thumbs to be able to escape the restraints.
Yes.
Okay?
That was
So Jen
so
is
cool.
badass. And why is she not affected by the virus?
I'm wondering if she already overcame fear.
Somehow, yeah. Like much like
Yeah.
Kasha did.
Actually succeeding.
Yeah, she is special in some way, which is so cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Makes me
And
excited.
I think it's why they put so much of a focus early in the season on Jen's background and whether or not her entire backstory is true or false. And I think probably when she was quite young, she underwent kind of an experience that essentially stopped her from having fear or being able to overcome fear when she experiences it.
And so that's why eventually the box becomes a test of whether you're ready to join the upper teachings of the sisterhood, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. It makes sense.
Because you're going to burst into fire eventually if you don't, because the virus is probably everywhere. I don't know. That's just my theory. It's still there. You'll burst into flame.
It makes so much sense, though. And it also makes Jen a really important player because if she's not at all affected, like all of the other sisters are still. And they don't know anything about what's going on that Tula and Valya have been dealing with. And they honestly, I don't even think they realize how important that stuff is, even if they were like brought it up. Like even Avila didn't seem to really get it, even though Raquel specifically said in front of her all that stuff about the virus.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, all of the younger sisters, our Powerpuff Girls, have had, like, little journeys of their own. I was really worried that they wouldn't, but, like, they've all gone on these, like, really interesting different directions. I feel like Jen is so close to being a hero. Like, she's so close. She's gone on her own little, I'm all about trying to save my friend, and, like, I care about others, and yeah.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to what they do with them in season 2. We can actually say that, knowing that there will be a season 2.
I know. So excited.
And so then eventually Emmeline realizes that this really isn't Lila, but it's specifically Dorothea. And so Emmeline has this like
Mother Dorothea. Yeah.
And Dorothea's trying to find records of all of her past followers. And she says they've been erased, and Emmeline's been telling her they disbanded. And so like all of the people who followed Dorothea, we now know aren't here. And we don't exactly know why. We're just told they disbanded, but we know that's probably not true. But anyway, Valya shows up at the palace to speak with Javicco because Francesca had told her that Javicco wanted an audience with her.
She reveals the plan to Francesca, right?
Yes.
We
Like,
do have the, like, Desmond and Natalia conversation before Superior showing Javicco being told he's a puppet by Natalia and Desmond. You should have worked with me, Desmond says. Natalia's, you're going to stay on the throne and you're going to do exactly what I want you to do, i.e., you're a puppet. And then Mother Superior shows up right away. And he's like, goodness, going to save me. Instead, she is sitting on his throne.
But he doesn't even care when she's sitting
He
on the
doesn't
throne.
care. He's like,
the guards are ready to arrest her, and he's like, no. He's like begging Valya. He's please. Like, I want things to go back to the way that they were.
So much easier when I was your puppet.
Yeah. And like, it was all exactly what Valya would have initially wanted. But now she just doesn't want to do it that way anymore. So she wants to go the furthest she can to ensure that she's arrested. And you can tell how much she's heartbroken when she like talks about like, how could Francesca actually love you? And all of this stuff, and completely destroys his entire world.
She says, we've been shaping your path since before you were born, which is true. Because it was like Raquel and her plans that had been shaping this. The only reason he was like ever up for a chance to be emperor was because of Raquel. Yeah. And then you didn't think Francesca actually loved you, did you? And that's the thing that sets him off.
Yeah. And so then obviously...
And he's arrest her. The guards are like, what? You don't arrest his sister? Come on.
The mother superior?
Yeah, and he's
he
like,
has to say it. Exactly, he has to say it again before they actually do anything.
we wouldn't dare.
It's so interesting. But anyway, so then we go back to Jen and Emmeline following Lila possessed by Dorothea. And Dorothea's reliving her death and hearing the echoes of the past and moving like she'd moved and stopping when she stopped and stuff. And then this moves her to use this thing, crowbar, to like open this pipe thing, which we learn ends up draining the Sisterhood pool, because then we see like an outer shot of this water like spraying out the side of the cliff.
The mother pool.
It's draining the mother pool. And then we flash back and we see Valya confronting Dorothea's followers with her besties. Choose. Either follow Valya or follow in Dorothea's path and end their own lives.
Yeah.
And all of them start using the voice and they just say choose. And like all of them do it except for one who we find out is Sister Vila. And I don't know if this made it into the edit of one of the past episodes, but we specifically, you said that you thought that she was a Vila, but I wasn't sure. So you were right, MC.
I know. They made a point of putting in this like tall woman with the same haircut. I was like, that's her. Come on. She's going to come back. But this moment is really key because it's like the idea that you can cut off this spiritual side of yourself is what builds like your shadow.
Yeah.
This builds the shadow. You can't cut off pieces of yourself. You can't emotionally mutilate yourself like this. And that's effectively, symbolically, like what is happening metaphorically? They're literally cutting off a piece that is actually critical, according to Raquella, to be a whole sisterhood and a powerful sisterhood.
Yeah. Emotional mutilation. Wow. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Even Avila, who like is alive, she like abandons that part of her past.
She abandons it until she hands her the crowbar later.
So cool.
Yeah.
And
remember, the shadow is angry because
yes,
because it has been ignored. You cannot kill the shadow. That's also really important. So that is why Dorothea is back, is because you cannot kill the shadow. You have to eat the shadow to have the shadow be part of you, but you cannot kill the shadow. It is impossible. You can't kill your own darkness. It's part of you. Just like how the sisterhood, they have this analytical side and they also have this very spiritual side. And we early on in the season, we talked about how the sisterhood itself is on its own journey. And it will be interesting to think about that long term once we have a chance to just digest the whole season.
Yeah. So Valya, we see her free Inez. The soldiers are like taking her in, and then she uses the voice on them, so they release her and stuff, and then she kills the guy. And then Theodosia shows up, and she's transformed herself into Inez in order to take her place. And then Inez
I have so many thoughts.
Convince Valya to also free Kieran. And then there's like this moment between Valya and Theodosia where she's like they're talking about this responsibility that Theodosia has and like the risk that she's taking. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's great. And effectively, this makes Theodosia a changeling because they're replacing the child with a fairy child. And symbolically, this is super important because it means that you've replaced the golden child, the true child, with the child that is demonic in the eyes of Natalia and Desmond. And so changelings themselves have a lot of symbolism behind them. They represent evil in the nest and things like that. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out because of what happens to Javicco. Her being a changeling means they need her to rule, but she won't be the Inez that they know. Changeling mythology and folklore comes from the idea that sometimes your child wouldn't be exactly what you thought it was. Some probably a little bit from postpartum depression, like you look at your child and you don't recognize them and things like that. And then there was like folklore that came from that you thought your child was a different child, or your child had crying all the time, couldn't get them to settle, etc. And so you were like, where's my actual baby? Where's my sweet child? Not this demonic child. But this is essentially what's happening symbolically, which is great for us.
That's a really interesting point that you made, because I'm almost wondering if, because obviously they'll know that Inez has escaped. Theodosia does things a little bit differently. And so they know about Theodosia and that she can change somehow. And they know that Inez isn't there.
I don't think
Because,
Desmond knows.
He sees her body starting to change back when she's like the guard on the ground. I think he and then she starts to change back. And then he says something like, lock this freak up, or something along those lines.
He didn't stay Inez.
No, she sees a guard on the ground, and because basically she would have gone back into the dispenser thing, but then she decides to, and then she uses that opportunity to try and stab Desmond later.
Right. Yeah.
Now that they know about her, and they know that Inez is gone, they're going to use her as a puppet with the threat of Desmond using his powers on her, and he'll start, and it'll obviously hurt, and then he'll stop, and then she'll be like, okay, fine, I'll turn into Inez for you.
Yeah.
That's a possibility that I'm thinking about.
But he's the only one who knows about it.
He could tell Natalia.
I don't know if he will.
He would. But like, he had her locked up, and then Natalia would probably go to Spencer's and be like, so who is this person who's not my daughter or Kieran? And he's at this point where he's still very like following what Natalia is doing. So I feel like he'd tell her, but we'll see.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I did notice that the face change thing happened. Yeah, on the fallen soldier. I thought it was just the voice for a second, but yeah, you're right. That is her. And that happens like right after that. He comes up and she stabs. But we have Valya and the two heroes escaping, and lots of scenes of them escaping. There isn't too much about that. They're just sneaking away in one of the transports.
And then, so then we see Francesca trying to reason with Javicco. Basically comes clean about stuff. And she ultimately decides she doesn't want to follow with what Valya's plan is. But because of everything that Valya said, Javicco's beyond the point of trust. And then he pulls a blade on her. But as they're having this conversation, she's, give me the blade. It is what it is. And she's, you can't even hurt me because the imprint won't let you. He has this amazing quote where it's a strange thing when you finally realize you've never known one true moment of freedom, but I can control this. And then he
greets death like an old friend.
And then Francesca like grabs him and stuff.
Yeah, it ends up being this like Romeo and Juliet moment. It's so sad. Oh, it's great.
My heart was broken. Anyways, Francesca is like begging Javicco to stay with her and stuff. But he's like bleeding out, obviously. And then we see this like above Francesca's shoulder shot. And then we just see Natalia's hand come up with the Gom Jabbar and prick her on the neck. And then you get a different shot where you see her and Francesca like freezes and then like collapses on top of Javicco.
Yeah.
It's so dramatic and this shot is beautiful. And then Natalia goes over and is like glaring down at Javicco, and then he's like grabbing onto her skirt, and then she like yanks it away. And then she runs off screaming, the Emperor has been killed.
Yeah, it was so good. It was great.
And so then we get back to the Sisterhood, and Dorothea has revealed the bodies at the bottom of the pool.
I have so many thoughts.
Yeah, so go for it.
Okay, Jung talks about how the unconscious, where the shadow lives, is a pool of water. And underneath it is oftentimes when Jung talks about the unconscious, he talks about how there's a skeleton in the water and that represents the shadow. And specifically in feminine symbolism, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who was a Jungian psychologist and often talks about the wild woman archetype, she would talk about the skeleton in the water being the skeleton woman. And that's a folklore about a skeleton woman who was abused by the patriarchy and abandoned in the water, and then is brought back to life through nourishment of that side, her spiritual soul. But when she is first found, she is angry and she craves meat. She is hungry for destruction, basically. And so this is what's going on symbolically, which is so good. This very feminine symbol that these are the skeletons in the water. And we have Dorothea acting out of these anger emotions, this feminine rage that we can often see in stories and in ourselves. Yeah.
So cool. It's a
The idea is like you
great
cannot
season.
be purely analytical. You also need to nurture your spiritual self. You cannot just be money, money, money. You also have to, nurture your artistic growth
Mhm.
potential as well, right? So it's that there's a balance between these things back to our three moons, which you've convinced me of over the course of this episode.
I'm so glad that I've convinced you of that.
It's really something I would catch. I'm like a little below my normal hip self right now.
That's okay. But yeah, it's an incredible scene. The visuals are just insane. And we see that Jen is still loyal to Tula. None of what's happened has swayed her away from Tula. And she even like leans over to Avila and you need to get Tula. She needs to know about this. And then Avila's, she's not here. And then like pushes Jen away.
And then
And
gives
then
the
crowbar to Dorothea. And
break
then
this
like
shit
all of
down.
yeah, and then Dorothea does this like speech thing, and she's, I'm gonna return us to our values and our righteous path, and then leads all of the sisters to the underground part of the sisterhood. But then Jen and Emmeline pause and look at each other, and then Emmeline's obviously I'm going, and then like she runs off with the other ones, and then Jen like falters for a moment, but then she collects herself and goes after them. And the impression that I got wasn't that she was suddenly swayed. It was that, okay, I need to know what's going on.
I need to see what happens. Yeah. Yeah. Jen has such an interesting story this season. It's so cool.
At this moment, when they get there, that Dorothea does destroy the AI.
Yeah.
She takes the crowbar down and everything goes black.
Oh, do you think it's like permanently done? I don't know how they keep the birth records without it.
Yeah. So my thing is
They like do bookkeeping. They have like
maybe
tons of little books.
they do bookkeeping, but then like how do they get all of the bookkeeping that they had stored in a neural? So I don't know exactly what's gonna happen, but part of me is almost like, what if this is like Jarvis in Age of Ultron, where we thought he was destroyed, but he just was dormant for a little bit?
Yeah.
Repair Renewal? I don't know.
Underworld represents like the creative force of the sisterhood. So I don't think she's gone.
No, I wouldn't. I don't think so anyway. At least it doesn't seem, yeah.
The fact that she has a feminine voice is really interesting.
I want to know who voices her because she sounds so familiar.
Yeah. We have Tula's flashback to Desmond's birth and her holding him. And like we get this cute moment where she like strokes his face, especially over his eye, which is so cute. And effectively, and then she's giving him away, right? Francesca helps him with this to protect him from a curse, which is Moses, right? And so he's wrapped in a sister cloak and given away. That's his baby blanket. And that is like Moses. And oh my God. I was like, I called him Moses. And then I was like, oh my God, he is Moses. Moses, of course, being a divine child that was born to change the world as we know it. So yeah, and she makes the decision to give him away so like Valya can't hurt him or use him for whatever means that she can't make him a tool. But the problem with divine children is that they're going to change the outcome of the world no matter what place they come from. And separating a child from your mother is one of the worst things that you can do to a divine child.
And what's interesting too is in terms of the Moses parallel, like obviously Moses is adopted by the Queen of Egypt and is part of the royal family. But in a way, Desmond also ends up aligning with the royal family that is in opposition with his birth family.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting as well as just like another further parallel of this motif.
Haro returns and we catch he grabs the spy gear, which we get the view of through like our vision. And it's been in the painting the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is so like a very Chekhov's gun of them to have him staring at the painting.
Yes.
It was great. You were right.
Yeah. And he recorded everything. He has all of that on record. But at the very least, it'll definitely endear Haro to Desmond. And
unless he's too afraid to use it.
Unless he's too afraid to use it. That's a very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Valya and
Okay.
Kieran and Yanez separate
And
because of
yes,
Desmond.
it is okay. So this scene is so interesting. I love it so much. So Valya's staying back so that she can like buy them time and stop Desmond. And then she's gonna meet Kieran and Inez when they get to the ship or whatever that they're escaping on. And so first I want to just end off Inez and Kieran before we get into everything else.
Sure.
They fight out off some more guards, just the two of them, and they're like back to back,
Couple.
like couple fighting. And they're
It's
like
hotter
yeah,
than we've had all season from them. Just them
yeah.
fighting together has been hotter than any of their actual hissy scenes. Yeah.
So that's how they get to where they need to be. And then we see what's going on with Valya. And it's the most badass thing I've ever seen. Because she's just walking so calmly. And then she's fighting with her knives and her skills. But she's also using the voice. So she's up. And then she slices the guy's throat.
Kill him.
And she's like,
yeah.
but then she's defend me.
Defend me, yeah.
Like, so good.
And this was like in the trailer. And I was like, when is this going to come out? And it's so good. It is exactly why you should be so scared of this dangerous old woman. You do not come up behind a dangerous old woman in an alleyway. She will kick your butt.
It's so good. And then Desmond kills his last two guys that Valya has controlled. And then it's just the two of them. And then Valya's, you've seen my end. Show me. And then Desmond tries to use his powers on her. And then
it's like he starts to, like, he makes that kind of noise, which again, like, it's just like a snake noise, which is again, consumption, right? The snake without consuming his own tail. Back to this idea of consumption, which it creates the burning. I'm obsessed with this. Yeah, exactly. Like eating without eating your own tail, without the sort of symbolism of renewal. The snake eating its own tail means death and rebirth, etc. Whereas just the snake eating is just death. Oh, wow. But it triggers the fear.
And we see Valya, and it's so cool because it starts out where she's like her older self and her hair is free and it's in the wind and she's on the ice. And this is like when Griffin fell through the ice. And then there's snow that goes past her and then it's her younger self. And then this whole fear of death moment that's personified is the moment where it's dealing with her guilt over what happened to Griffin.
Yeah, and like Griffin represents like her own animist in the underworld, like, and so she has to come to terms with how she feels like she's betrayed him and that shadow that she had to deal with, and that you have to go of the darkness and let go of your shame and your guilt and all of these things. One thing that I love about this moment, and then Tula shows up as she's like burning and she helps her. She's like, let go of your fears. Arctic wastelands are actually deserts. So this is her own version of what is death. What is the land of the dead? Dune is Arrakis. It is like the land of the dead. But for her, it's this Arctic wasteland. And so she has this death moment, but she sees the worm in the Arctic, which is so cool. It's very personalized to her own journey. And you have to let it pass through you. You have to meet death like an old friend and let it come to you and sacrifice yourself for the survival of the kingdom as the king she is, so that she can become the Crone who has died and is reborn without fear of death.
It's so good. And there's a moment where Tula's talking her through this and telling her she can't fight it.
Yeah.
To stop doing that. And she says something like, literally, let it pass over you, through you, or something, which is basically a line right from the Litany Against Fear.
Yeah. I swear this is going to create the entire thing. It has to. It's so perfectly written. Yeah.
It's so good. The way that they implement like classic Dune stuff is so well timed. I love it.
But she sees past the vision, which is the consumption of the worm. It flashes between hers and Desmond's like experience. And then she sees the eyes, which actually were just one blue light over top of Desmond. And we see like the weirdness of having your eye pulled out. It was wild. And it was actually just this one light. But the eyes being the sort of connection to his eye being the place pointing to his eye as the aspect of the machine. And it's funny because I've been thinking this whole time how weird his eye looked because of the contact that's in it. And it's exactly that. It has a little flake of blue in it.
Mm.
It's weird. And now we know why.
Yep. It's such a crazy scene. And I've been saying that I didn't think that, because people were saying that the blue eyes were going to be like Omnius, the big robot.
Yeah.
from
No, it's
Brian
even
Herbert stuff.
closer. It's literally just his vision of death.
Yeah. But I also don't think we were wrong when we were saying that we thought the blue eyes were like the point in just that represents where the sisters are not able to go further with their prescience, because that's
Yeah.
literally where all of the visions end. That's where all of them end,
The
except for
existential death. Yeah.
except for in Valya's case, but that's just because Valya's been able to like go through this process,
Yeah.
see past that. So,
But I don't think that in the end, I don't think that what the sisterhood is afraid of in the future is necessarily this vision, because this vision will resolve. It is whatever is represented by the shadowy figure that we see at the end of the vision. Whatever that is will be part of what
Yes.
they are afraid of.
Yeah. And this is another thing that I'll bring up because I think it's really important. Because a lot of people who have brought up the fact that they don't like Brian Herbert's interpretation of the Butlerian Jihad because it has killer robots. And they're like, no, because Herbert was like, it let other humans in machines enslave us. I think what this scene does so good is it reiterates that there is a human behind this. There is a being behind this that is not.
They're not
robot.
on their
Or at
own.
least- or not on their own. And it doesn't seem like, it seems to insinuate that this is like another being, like another person, like not a robot who is ultimately behind this. They're showing us that Frank Herbert interpretation of how machines are used to the detriment of humanity. And I just think that's really important to point out. Because
there is a machine, but it's being controlled by somebody else. That's what
exactly.
like Valya says. And then she's, I know how to take care of this. Whips out her knife. I can get to his eye. Tula's like, peak queen. Oh, he's my son. She's like, but I thought you were son too.
Like,
Tula's like,
we're
your hold on the sisterhood was never fixed. I could have taken you out at any moment, but I didn't want to, because you and I are the same. Two wolves, both willing to do whatever we need to do. And trust me, he's their victim, which is perfect. Heroes don't mean to be stuck in the underworld. They really don't. They're trying to do something heroic, and they end up just not being able to resolve this darkness that's within themselves.
Yeah. I think it's so important that Desmond is identified as a victim of all of this, because I think very easily he could just be completely demonized, or like just he's an antagonist and that's all there is to him. But I think it's very important also for the overall message and point of this conflict is that he's a victim, and the uniting of humanity and the overcoming the machine. And that quote that I read from Joseph Campbell, and like what the machine is within society, like it's technology, yes, but it's also the politics and the economy and the state. And it's really important that he's not framed as just purely an irredeemable villain. And so Valya basically like,
I'm not afraid anymore. And if the shadows are where they want to fight, then that is where I shall go, which is the biggest Crone move. I want to go into this, but I'm losing my voice. But like, the Crone is the ultimate mentor, and they're not afraid of death. They've become friends with death. And so to say I can willingly walk into the underworld, to the unconscious, and deal with the shadows is like such a big power flex. I love her so much. It's great. She needed this change. Like, she needed this transformation where she didn't have the weight of leadership on her. Instead, she has this micro journey she has to go on with her young heroes, and to work with them, because that's really important for a crone because it teaches them about youth again and about the things that they might have missed when they were a child or when they were younger, when they were a maiden and when they were a hero.
Yeah. I think it's exactly, like you said, it's exactly what Valya needed. And so then she leaves to go meet up with Kieran and Inez again, and then leaves Tula there. And Desmond's been awake, and I think he's been, like, consciously overhearing most of that. And
That whole
I really
conversation.
think
I let him
he
go
that
because I didn't want him to become with us. So it's okay, maybe my witch was my mom. And he has this whole moment where he's crying.
It's such a good scene because Tula leans down to him and tries to reach out, but then he flinches away. But then she keeps trying to gently be like, "Let me hold you," and then he does, and he lets her, like, cuddle him and hold him, and then he hugs
And
her
then
back.
and then she strokes the eye, and we get this flashback to the moment where she strokes her the baby eye. And this is like one of my things, like scars are where the light leaks in. The scars are meant to be healed. And so like her doing that like motion is like her healing him in some way. And this is him eating his shadow. This is him eating his witch.
It's
Okay. So it's really important because, again, the mother feeds, the witch eats. And the witch has been brought back into the person, which means that now he has an opportunity to actually heal. And he might have actually gone through his apotheosis moment, his union with his other half that he needed to, his darkness, so that he can actually exit the underworld and go on a positive change journey himself. I don't think he necessarily is out of his hero phase, but he might be out of being a bully, and he might look at the world in a different way, including his relationship to Natalia. And you and I talked about this as this is what we've always wanted for Ben Solo. This is what we always wanted for Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. This is what we wanted for Anakin. One of the greatest sins of Star Wars, in my opinion, is that not Star Wars as a franchise, but in the story is the separation between Anakin and his mother because it takes him on this path where he's very reliant on the women relationships in his life and he becomes Orpheus like in that he is always trying to seek this lost feminine within himself that he cannot retain, like he cannot come back to him until the end of Return of the Jedi. And we talked a lot about how Desmond is very Vader-like in this story and how powerful it would be to have Smee come back and give Anakin Vader a hug in his full Vader costume, or Padme give him a hug and say, "I still love you, even though you're this monster." Oh my God, this is what we've needed this whole time.
And
The
specifically,
rant
like,
over.
we were just talking about before recording that they didn't, but they could have done a scene where Leia hugs her son,
Yeah.
but they didn't take that route. And it is what it is. That movie has been made. But I think that there's a lot to be said about this because we talked about how Desmond is stuck in the underworld because he's been exiled from redemption. That's
Yeah.
what happens. If you don't die in the underworld, if you're stuck there, it's because you've been exiled from redemption. And there's something that's keeping you from going on the rest of that journey.
And you end up
Try
becoming
a
a
little bit
villain. That's really important. Like you become this like shadow archetype.
And in every way, like in Vader's story, he's redeemed, but then he dies.
Yeah.
Ben, he's redeemed, but then he dies. And I think
Desmond has an opportunity to be redeemed and live.
because of what's going on with
Tula.
Yeah. And so
so powerful.
It's so good. And this specifically makes me think of this concept that Clarissa Piccola Estes talks about as well, which is the sin eater. And so in Norse mythology, the sin eaters are carrion eaters who devour the dead, incubate them in their bellies, and then carry them to Hel, who is not a place but a person. Hel is the goddess of life and death. She shows the dead how to live backwards. They become younger and younger until they are ready to be reborn and re-released back into life. And so this constitutes an individuation process for the most base aspects of the psyche. So by draining the energy of the predatory aspect of the psyche, they are then returned to the compassionate life, death, life mother. And we've already previously identified Tula as this dual goddess of life and death.
Yeah.
And we even see that moment where she like touches his eye. It's like when she touched him when he was a baby and she's holding him like he's a child. And she is the life-death mother. She's the dual goddess who's incubating him like she is re-raising her son and giving him this chance to be re-released back into life, be reborn, and exit the underworld. This is what they're presenting as a possibility here. And I really hope they do this.
It's so cool. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I'm so proud of them. This is exactly what we need from our stories. That it's never too late for the villain.
Yeah.
This positive change arc is super important because it shows you sometimes the villain is actually the victim.
And I think that's, in a way, I feel like that's just also aligned with Dune.
Yeah.
And Paul is this character where, and I love this quote so much. I don't know who originally said it, but I saw it somewhere online and I always remembered it because it was like, Paul is not the villain or the hero. He's the Imperium's hubris. Everything the Imperium was contributed to who Paul became. So he's not a hero in the traditional hero sense, but he's also not a villain in that traditional sense. More complex than that. And then like God Emperor of Dune, it has this entire arc where even though he's a tyrant, like a overarching complete ruler, the God Emperor, it's necessary and he knows it for this greater good. So it's more complicated than him just being a villain, but you also see him in a very human way. He falls in love. He has a love story in God Emperor of Dune. And so I think the idea of someone like Desmond not just being a bad guy who eventually gets killed off is so much more interesting for the plot and what the story's trying to say. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's your take, MC?
I think it plays into what Joseph Campbell, what Clarissa Pinkola says, what Marie-Louise von Franz says is we're not good or bad. We're somewhere in the middle. And so it's a more truthful representation of what our fiction tells us than necessarily saying there are good guys and there are bad guys and never the twain shall meet. And it's more in the modern storytelling idea, which for its time, Dune had quite complex heroes that did bad things and good things, right? And so I love it. And I love that it's saying something very powerful about redemption and that redemption for any character is possible. And that those that make bad choices are not necessarily evil. They're just in a bad place right now.
And I think that one thing that I will say that I didn't love about the recent Star Wars movies is this idea that Ben's redemption was essentially disregarded right away. But like here in this story, there's actually no, we can save him. He's a victim of this just as much as anybody else. And you need to give me the chance to try and save him because I know that it's possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's also story-wise more interesting than just this is even a possibility.
Interesting. And it also says our lost sons are not lost. And yeah, I'll probably have more thoughts when I'm less sick, but that's what you're getting.
And so the last little bit of the episode, after the part with Tula and...
He says arrest her.
But we'll see what happens after that. I don't know if he really means it that much. We'll see.
He might revert. So that's the thing that I have to like... Okay. So oftentimes between seasons of a show, you're going to have some reversion of characters because they have to start out like a little bit so they can remind people of where people were at.
Quo.
Yeah, like the characters might revert a little bit before they could continue to progress on. So I wouldn't be surprised if he reverts a little bit, but then continues on a positive change arc.
I would assume
where he
like
is.
he'd visit her in jail and they'd like talk, and then he'd be grappling with this and then and whatnot. But
but
so
we'll have to wait for the next season. The next season. But they arrive on Arrakis, which is so cool. And you and I were not sure that they would go to Arrakis. I wasn't even sure if Constantine would leave, but he left right away. So all three of our hero characters, minus Theodosia, I'm not sure what she's at right now.
Mm.
The We have Kieran, we have Constantine. They're all like hanging out at Arrakis. And with Valya now being a crone, that means that she's a mentor to young heroes. And she's literally like guiding them. Like, this is such a common archetype that we've seen in all of our media. She's like, the path to our enemy begins here. It's, yeah, I'm about to lead you into the desert for your own hero's journey. Strap up your boots, get on your still suits. We're going.
And yeah, I assume they've gone to one of the Sisterhood safe houses, and I'm really curious what they're going to be doing. Michaela's going to be there. It's so interesting. I can't wait to see like Kieran and Michaela when they meet, what that's going to be like, because he was like, I never want to see you again. And now
Nez is there.
probably will. And Inez is there.
And he's hanging out with the Mother Superior.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's
So
yeah.
embarrassing.
So it's going to be so interesting. They left this episode off in a place where there are important overarching things that have been addressed and have come full circle, but they're also leaving it in a place where I want season 2 now. I can't wait to see what comes next.
It's like leaving it at this place where you're like, I'm about to start a new journey. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
The characters are where they are, and you know that they're about to go and do something cool. And so it does absolutely, you want that next step.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I guess we'll dive into the alchemical journey now and like recap where I feel like we've gotten to.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we've achieved distillation. Dennis William Hawke talks about distillation as a purifying circulation of rising vapors and falling condensate, which enables alchemists to purify the substances into their most essential components and is the most important operation in chemistry. Alchemists believe that distillation releases the pure essence of spirit in the evaporating vapors. And the Emerald Tablet describes the distillation process in terms of above and below. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. On the psychological level, the distillation of wisdom in our lives can take many decades. The continued cycles of distillation eventually produce a thick and extremely concentrated solution the alchemist called the mother of the stone. What was fermented and released in the vapors are now identified and separated, and you don't coagulate until those two are combined. In my opinion, I don't feel like we've gone to coagulation yet, but we've definitely, and maybe I could be swayed in that direction, but at least I feel like we leave with so many different characters in a place where what's fermented is clear and what's in vapors is clear. That's been identified separate, but we haven't brought that together just yet. And I don't know if we necessarily will in terms of this part of this journey until certain allegiances have changed and until we have identified the Kwisatz Haderach as the goal and we've joined the Sisterhood, things like that. And examples of these, of things being separate and clear and stuff in terms of distillation, Tula's determined to find her son. Tula's determined to transmute the virus. Viola has overcome fear. She's no longer afraid. She accepts she must move in the shadows. Desmond now knows all of this history about his mom, but then also essentially what he's wanted, which is to defeat Valya or unseat Valya or achieve a certain level of power. He's also done that because Javicco's out of the picture and Natalia's taken over. All of these things are separate and clear, but we're not amalgamating anything yet. So that's why I'm thinking we haven't achieved coagulation. And I feel like that's a season 2 thing. And in terms of this, Carl Jung talks about how once you've achieved coagulation, there's no going back. You've completed this cycle. So you can't go back to who you were before. But Joseph Campbell's talked about how things are cyclical. So even though you've completed one cycle of life and you've learned all of those lessons, you can still go on a different journey and learn new lessons. So even if we finish out coagulation season 2 at some point, we can also, there is the room for us to go on another journey, especially with other characters who haven't done as much work or haven't gone through much character journeying in this way as Valya and Tula have. So like our acolytes, our Powerpuff Girls, like they can have their own alchemical journeys as well. So yeah, that's where I see us ending off this season at. What do you think, MC?
Yeah, that's great analysis. I agree. I definitely don't think that they're where they need to be at to have coagulation.
Yeah. So that was episode 6, the finale of season 1 of Dune Prophecy.
We made it.
We made it. I just want to say thank you so much, MC, for doing this with me. It means so much, and I had such a fun time doing this. And thank you to everyone at Dune Newsnet for helping us be able to bring everyone this show. And thank you to everyone who listens and everyone who's submitted questions and joined this conversation with us, and everyone who will find this show later on. It's just, this incredible, and I'm so thankful for it.
And this is how we like to talk about media and fiction through the lens of this very metamythical perspective that helps us understand not only stories that tell us more about ourselves, but also ourselves. I think that especially through the course of the show, it was delicately and impressively done. The slow arcs and build and what we talked about felt good to be right a lot through our analysis. And that's what happens when you see mythic motifs and you're able to talk about them in this way. You end up being right a lot. That was fun too. Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll be able to do a season retrospective and maybe bring a couple people on to discuss it and just go over the season as a whole as we anticipate season 2. And yeah, so stay tuned because there will be more of the Sisterhood podcast. Sisterhood above all.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
We hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Sisterhood. Remember to like and subscribe so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and follow us at Podcast Above All on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky.